He reached for a piano he wasn't supposed to touch, and in one moment, the entire room fell silent. What they heard next, it changed everything. Elijah Brooks wasn't invisible. Not exactly. People saw him. Teachers took attendance. Kids borrowed pencils. But no one really looked. Not close enough to see what lived behind those quiet eyes. He didn't talk much. Not because he was shy. He just didn't see the point in wasting words when no one seemed to listen. He lived on the edge of Baton Rouge, on the west side, near Florida Boulevard, in a cramped second-story apartment where the walls were too thin and the nights were too loud. His mom, Charlene, worked double shifts at a rundown clinic. His older brother, Isaiah, drifted in and out of the house with a group Elijah couldn't trust. But Elijah had music. Not a fancy setup, no glossy instruments, no private lessons. Just an old, half-broken keyboard at the community rec center down the block. It buzzed if you plugged it in wrong. Some keys didn't work at all, but to Elijah, it was more than enough. Every afternoon, as soon as school let out, Elijah would run straight bare. He didn't need sheet music. He didn't need lessons. The sounds lived inside him. Melodies built from emotion. Rhythm shaped by silence. Some days he played joy. Some days pain. And some days he played something so personal, so raw, it didn't even have a name. At school, Elijah flew under the radar. Not a troublemaker, not a standout. He existed between the cracks, quiet in the hallways, quick to disappear into corners. Sometimes during math class, he'd tap rhythms on the edge of his desk, complex patterns no one ever noticed. During the morning announcements, his eyes would brighten when the school anthem played. But mostly, people ignored him, except when they needed help with homework or someone to mock. But there was one person who saw more. Ms. Delacroix, the school's aging but passionate music teacher, noticed the way Elijah hummed in the lunch line. She heard him sing under his breath while stacking chairs. She pulled him aside after class one day and asked a question he'd never been asked before. "Do you hear the world differently?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. From then on, she nurtured that difference, introducing him to chords, harmonies, the language of music, without ever dulling his instincts. "You've got something rare," she told him. "Don't ever let anyone convince you it's small." He didn't plan to. One Thursday morning before spring break, everything changed. The school announced a partnership event with Bayside Prep, an elite private school across town. A community arts exchange. Elijah's class would visit the campus for one day of workshops and performances. Most students groaned. Elijah sat up straighter than he had in weeks. He'd heard of Bayside, with its stone fountains, manicured, and rumors of baby grand pianos in every classroom. It felt like another planet, a place for people who spoke in golf terms, not gospel chords. Charlene ironed his best shirt the night before, one with a stain she couldn't quite scrub out. "Don't embarrass me," she warned, not looking up. "And don't touch nothing that ain't yours." He nodded, but deep down he knew if a real piano stood in front of him, all bets were off. The bus ride to Bayside took only 30 minutes. But when Elijah stepped off, he felt like he'd landed on another planet. Marble floors, museum-quality hallways, polished brass doors, and walls that smelled like lemon cleaner and old money. The Bayside students wore blazers and leather shoes. They laughed loudly, the kind of laugh that doesn't worry about tomorrow. Elijah kept his head down, walked softly, felt the weight of his neighborhood, his thrift store sneakers, his silence. Then came the moment he'd been waiting for. A songwriting session. Room 208. He entered with a group of Bayside students who talked casually about Teslas and ski trips. Elijah said nothing until he saw it. A full-size, gleaming black Steinway grand piano. It's lit open, its keys smooth as glass. It didn't hum. It commanded. He stepped toward it. "Don't even think about it." The voice sliced through the room. Elijah turned. A tall boy with slick blonde hair and a smug grin blocked his path. His monogram blazer bore the initials PJW. Two friends flanked him like bodyguards. "That piano? My dad donated it," he said. "You got anything like that in your neighborhood?" Elijah stayed quiet. "Didn't think so. Careful, man. Those keys weren't made for dirty fingers." Laughter stifled snickers. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Something in Elijah's chest sank, then boiled. The heat rose to his cheeks. His hands clenched. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. He was done. Done waiting. Elijah stepped forward. He didn't ask permission, didn't explain, didn't warn. He pulled out the piano bench, sat. His hands hovered over the keys like birds preparing to land. A single note rang out, then another. A C, an E, a G, a chord. Then came the left hand, soft but steady. A walking bass line, like footsteps through a memory. His right hand joined, threading a melody that only he knew. A tune built from empty kitchens, cracked walls, broken promises, but also church choirs. Gospel rhythms, his mother's voice on Sunday afternoons. And suddenly, the room changed. Voices died down. Chairs creaked as heads turned. Laughter stopped. He played like the keys belonged to him. Like the instrument remembered him. It wasn't perfect. He stumbled, missed a note. But it was real. Alive. When he finally stopped playing, silence held the room like a spell. A girl whispered, "Whoa." Then one clap. Then another. Then a wave of quiet applause from kids who had never looked at him twice. Even Preston, the smug rich boy, stayed frozen. He didn't smile, but he didn't speak either. One of his friends muttered, "That wasn't bad." But Elijah heard what he really meant. It was respect. Just then, the instructor entered, clipboard in hand, mid-sentence, and froze. She looked around confused. "Did I miss something?" No one answered. Elijah didn't say anything as he stood and walked back to his seat. He didn't need to. He didn't play to impress them. He didn't play to prove a point. He played because music was the only place where he was free, where he was whole. They could laugh, they could doubt, but they'd remember. And the next time they looked at him, they'd see not a quiet boy from the wrong side of town, but a pianist who left a room breathless. She asked, "Did I miss something?" And in that small question, everything shifted. Elijah pushed the bench back with slow precision. He didn't say a word, nor did he need to. The silence in that moment had weight. It was earned. He stepped into the hallway, his chest still buzzing from adrenaline. Pride and fear danced in his mind. He hadn't planned to play, hadn't even known he could until now. But after those first resonant notes, he sensed something deeper had changed. Peeking back, he saw a small crowd gathering. Students from other workshops, a few teachers. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, surprise, admiration. And at the far end stood Ms. Delacroix, hand pressed to her lips, not in shock, but something gentler, more tender. Her eyes glistened. Elijah turned away, feeling both seen and shy. As she approached, he swallowed hard. "You played that?" she whispered. He nodded, breath catching. "That was your music," she said softly. Again, he nodded, afraid to speak it aloud. Yes. Ms. Delacroix gazed back into the room, then to him. That isn't just good. That's unforgettable." Elijah exhaled. He had never thought about being memorable, only wanted to hear sound without fear. Then another teacher stepped forward, a poised woman in a gray blazer. "I'm Mrs. Coldwell. I run the advanced music program," she introduced herself. She had heard him through the walls. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "Ever taken lessons? How about playing something at the final performance this afternoon?" he faltered. "Me? No, I don't know." "You don't have to," she encouraged. "But you may always wonder if you didn't." Elijah looked at Mrs. Coldwell, at Ms. Delacroix, then at the floor. Doubt rose, a second punch. Classroom playing was one thing. Auditorium was another. Before he could answer, she offered softly, "Trust me, or you'll regret it." He nodded. Okay. Teachers began to disperse, the hallway's energy folding back into routine. Elijah followed slowly behind Miss Delacroix, heart pounding, hallway stretching endless before him. It wasn't confidence yet, but something close. Certainty. As if every note he'd ever heard had led him here. Preston lingered behind, whispered Elijah's name, but only shrugged when Elijah turned. No words, just space. Moments later, Elijah stood behind the curtain. The auditorium stretched wide. Rows of half. To him, it looked enormous, intimidating, but also familiar now. His shirt was damp under the lights. Nerves fluttered, though he trusted his hands. Miss Delacroix appeared by his side. "They're going to love this." He swallowed. "What if I mess up?" She smiled. "Even then, they'll feel it." That reassurance settled something inside him. A student announcer, a tall girl with thick glasses, introduced him. "Please welcome Elijah Brooks from Martin Luther King Jr. Middle." Performing an original piano piece. Polite applause. Elijah stepped forward, not looking at the crowd, focused on the Steinway shining under the lights, as if it knew him. He sat, inhaled, and began. Not the spring melody, but a new composition, slower, more deliberate, like writing a letter with sound. Each chord carried meaning. The ache of waiting, the warmth of small joys, the gritty gospel of Sunday mornings. He played wholly, rawly, the pauses intentional, the crescendos earned. Every eye unwatched, every breath caught. By the end, he stared at the final note, letting it hang like a wide-open question. He lifted his hands slowly, almost as if releasing himself. Then came the applause, not polite, but real. Quiet gasps. A teacher with tears. Phones lowered to show respect. And Elijah, he bowed his head and exited the stage fast, before the moment caught him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, chest tight. A voice. That was incredible. It was Preston, blazer buttoned, hair tidied, brashness gone. "I didn't know you could do all that." Elijah stayed silent. What I said earlier, I was out of line. Still no words, but Preston offered a nod. Elijah replied softly, "You didn't have to." They parted in wordless understanding. Miss Delacroix appeared, smiling. "You did it." Elijah laughed, breathless. "Come on," she said. "There's someone I want you to meet." By the time Elijah returned to Martin Luther King Jr. Middle, he sat near the window, watching familiar storefronts roll by. Comforting, yet somehow smaller. Classmates gave high fives. One kid, Jamari, teased, "You made rich kids clap, bro. Next level." Elijah smiled internally, but his mind buzzed with something unnamed, an emotion deeper than pride. At school steps, Ms. Delacroix waited. Pulling him aside quietly, she said, "Mrs. Coldwell wants to see you again. She runs a scholarship-based summer arts program." Elijah swallowed. "I don't have money for lessons." "That's the point," she replied. "Everything's covered. You just have to show up." He stared at his scuffed sneakers. Opportunities like this didn't come to kids like him. Ms. Delacroix promised to speak with his mom. At home, that night, his mother held the brochure and a half-burnt grilled cheese. Her silence was loud. "They're not using him for anything?" she finally asked. Ms. Delacroix said, "No. Ma'am, this program has helped kids across the state." Charlene looked through the paper. Mentions of dorms, supervision, return home at summer's end. Elijah sat on the couch, backpack still on. "You want this?" she asked. He nodded. She sighed, a long sigh. "He's 12, she said quietly. "I'll be careful," he whispered. She said, "I'll think on it." That was enough. A week later, a letter arrived, a white envelope with blue trim. Elijah read the scholarship offer 3 times before handing it to his mother. She read, nodded, returned it. He packed a duffel too big for summer. On the drive to campus, Miss Delacroix shared stories. Past students who went to Juilliard, Berkeley. "None of them sound like you," she told him. He liked that. The campus wasn't fancy. It felt honest. Chipped paint, worn benches, practice rooms carrying years of hope. First day, instructors listened, asked him about his favorite key. D minor, he said, and they nodded. By week 1, he'd composed 3 new pieces. Week 2, he taught another student feel-based chord changes rather than structured theory. One evening, his main instructor sat with him in the practice room. "You know what I told my husband after your first piece?" she asked. Elijah shook his head. That's what talent sounds like when it's unafraid. He came back to Bayside Prep, not on a field trip, but as a featured performer in their annual fall recital. He'd grown, taller, more poised. His curls neat, his hands carried certainty. He still spoke little, but when he did, people listened. Miss Delacroix and Charlene sat in the front row, pride shining on both. Charlene whispered before the show, uncertain. Elijah answered, "Just want to hear the music." The MC introduced. Tonight's final performer reminds us why music still matters. Elijah Brooks. He walked on, the Steinway awaiting. He played his latest piece, pure movement, honest. Mid-performance, he looked up and saw Preston 3 rows back. No words passed between them, only shared understanding through silences. When the last note resonated, the audience rose in applause, full and heartfelt. Charlene stood first, tears brimming. Teachers and students came forward asking questions. A skinny boy with crooked glasses tugged Elijah's sleeve and said, "That made me want to try piano." Elijah knelt and smiled. Just start. That night, on the drive home, his mother glanced at him. "You okay?" He replied, "I don't know." Neither did I. She held the steering wheel tight. Maybe it was always there. Back at home, Elijah sat with a notebook, this time writing words instead of music. Scattered lines formed into a truth. You don't have to be invited to be allowed. He didn't wait for permission. He took the stage, beautifully, gently, fully. In doing so, he reminded everyone, and himself, that talent transcends background. It listens and responds when given the